Good day to everyone, and welcome to the FAST webinar on Mobilizing Anti-Money Laundering Actors in the Fight Against Modern Slavery. My name is Dawn Spicer from the CFATF, and I will be your moderator. Finance Against Slavery and Trafficking, FAST, is a multi-stakeholder initiative based at the UN University Center for Policy Research in New York. It works to mobilize the financial sector against modern slavery, including forced labor, child labor, and human trafficking. It was established in 2019 with the support of the governments of Liechtenstein, Australia, the Netherlands, and private sector actors. FAST has additional support from the governments of Norway and Luxembourg and a range of other donors, and is now working in partnership with public and private sector entities around the world to end modern slavery. The ultimate goal of this webinar is to raise awareness of modern slavery in the region, and in so doing, improve the quality and quantity of modern slavery-related suspicious activity and suspicious transaction reports that are submitted to our financial intelligence units. We hope that this should result in an increase in the number of investigations and convictions for these crimes and an eventual remedy for victims and survivors. One piece of housekeeping before we proceed, and this is for questions on the presentations. We ask that you please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. Thank you. So once again, welcome. It is now my pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker, Mr. R.J. Berry, Director of Cayman Islands' FIU and Chair of the CFATF's Heads of FIU Forum.
Thank you, Edie Spicer. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I want to start by thanking the CFATF Secretariat and FAST for inviting me to make these opening remarks. As I was preparing for this morning, I realized that despite making over 100 presentations, I believe this is only the second time I've been asked to make opening remarks or a keynote address. So why this guy, you may be asking? Well, I asked Simon the same question when he asked if I would be willing to make this address. I want you to know off the bat, I'm not an expert in this subject matter, but what I do bring to the table is a genuine interest to better understand modern slavery, not only globally, but also regionally and specifically for the Cayman Islands, so that I can be better equipped to combat it. I have made it a priority to plug into experts, attend webinars, and get involved in projects. My first major assignment, so to speak, was being the project leader for a CFATF Risk, Trends, and Methodologies Group project on the financial flows from human trafficking and the smuggling of migrants. To be honest, I had agreed to be part of the project team to demonstrate greater CFATF involvement. When they needed a project team leader, I thought that would be icing on the cake. Plus, it was a topic that I had a keen interest in, so to me, it was a win-win situation. A major part of the project methodology was a questionnaire circulated to CFATF members to gather data on incidents of human trafficking and the smuggling of migrants for the period 2017 to 2019. The project culminated with a report being presented at the May 2021 CFATF plenary. However, due to the insufficiency of data received, the resulting analysis could not sufficiently support the objectives of the project. The lack of regional information, including from the Cayman Islands, did not deter my interest in the subject matter. I was introduced to FAST in January 2022. However, I had met Daniel in January 2017 at my first Egmont group meeting. I believe he was head of FIU Liechtenstein at the time and vice chair of the Egmont group's Technical Assistance and Training Working Group. In January 2022, FAST made a presentation to the TATWG, essentially pitching a proposal to develop a joint program to combat trafficking and forced labor. The TATWG endorsed the proposal and formed a project team, which I'm an active member of. FAST and TATWG also organized an operational training session on modern slavery and human trafficking at the Egmont Group plenary in July 2022. I agreed to participate by giving a testimonial on the challenges the Financial Reporting Authority faces, such as very limited information being available from suspicious activity reports and law enforcement intelligence or investigations. I had quickly realized that FAST was an expert I wanted to work with, and I have continued to plug in by attending a number of FAST virtual sessions, most recently on their work on financial inclusion. Earlier this year, I was in Dakar, Senegal, attending the Egmont working group meetings. The TAP-WG FAST project team met to progress the online training program being developed for financial intelligence units, which we anticipate rolling out in July 2023, fingers crossed. At the conclusion of the working group meetings, attendees were offered the option to visit the island of Gorée. While I did not visit the island, I did my usual Google searches, which revealed the following. The island of Gorée is a UNESCO Heritage Cultural Site and is considered to be an exceptional testimony to one of the greatest tragedies in the history of human societies, the slave trade. From the 15th to the 19th century, it was the largest slave trading center of the African coast. So, though slavery is universally prohibited, here we are in 2023 discussing modern slavery, estimated by some to be the third most pervasive criminal economy in the world behind drugs and armed trafficking. In my humble opinion, the statistics are absolutely staggering. The 2021 global estimates indicate there are 50 million people in situations of modern slavery on any given day, either forced to work against their will or in a marriage that they were forced into. It's estimated that US 150 billion is earned annually from slavery. Many contextual factors contribute to modern slavery, such as poverty and inequality, discrimination, including against women, conflict and humanitarian crises, criminality and corruption, and supply chain issues, some of which have been heightened by COVID-19. As I said earlier, I'm no expert, but it seems to me that all the elements of a perfect storm have been and continue to brew. We have an ongoing war between Russia and Ukraine, political instability in a number of countries, widespread global corruption, extreme weather events driving world hunger, extraordinary levels of displaced people, to name a few. If there was ever a time for all of us to adopt a proactive approach to fighting the scourge of modern slavery, I say that time is now. Our usual approach to assessing the money laundering threat of a predicate offense includes the number of SARS, criminal investigations, and prosecutions, which for modern slavery are very low, not only regionally, but also globally. In my personal opinion, this is also a type of crime that regularly goes unreported. So our usual ways are not going to give us an accurate representation of the problem. Additionally, modern slavery is often complex in nature and interwoven with other criminality, including organized crime. I read an article recently highlighting that persons in modern slavery were being forced to perpetrate investment scams, such as pig butchering, defrauding victims of millions of dollars. My plea this morning is essentially a call to action for each person attending this webinar. As the chair of the CFATF Head of FIUs Forum, the fight against modern slavery and human trafficking is number one on my work plan for the year. Representatives from FAST have already agreed to present at the next meeting of the CFATF Heads of FIUs Forum at the CFATF May plenary, which I know will build on today's webinar. Financial intelligence units can and need to play a key role in each of our jurisdictions to better understand our threats and vulnerabilities. In turn, they will then be able to sensitize and educate financial service providers and DNFBPs. Law enforcement agencies and other competent authorities have a similar role to play. So what role will you play in this fight? Thank you for joining us this morning, and I'm confident that you'll find the webinar useful and thought-provoking.
Thank you, Mr. Berry, for taking us through your journey to becoming an avid advocate against these atrocious crimes of modern slavery and human trafficking. And this is exactly what we want. We want to invite the audience and others to recognize the prevalence of these atrocious crimes and to begin to do something about it and factor it into your AML systems and your laws and everything else. We will now move on to welcome Mr. Ronnie Marty, who is a survivor of human trafficking. Mr. Marty will discuss the importance of a true survivor inclusion. Mr. Marty.
Thank you so much, and really thank you for the opportunity to be part of this amazing group of professionals and the chance just to bring an honest conversation about the importance of a true survivor inclusion from a survivor perspective. In this case would be me. So the first things, what I think is that we should understand that human trafficking is a problem that needs immediate attention, and that we cannot take right action without the main actors. And in this case, main actors would be the victims and survivors of human trafficking. I have to recognize and thank FAST for truly including survival to collaborate and bring our experience, knowledge, and expertise to the table to find solutions that helps first victims and survival to rebuild their lives by providing access to tools and financial product that we need to continue with our lives. The second thing is to educate governments, public, private, and the financial sectors about how they can help and be part of the solution. I always say that if you ignore the problem and do nothing about it, so you are part of the problem. So we need to take actions when we see things like that. One thing is working with survival. So to really include survival and the inclusion is there, we need to work with survivors hand to hand to understand the issue from survival perspective first. So before creating any program or any system to help survival, we need to listen and understand the needs and challenges victims and survivors are going through every day by not having a simple saving a checking account. Let's say, there's a big difference in our day-to-day life. uh, it's crucial, but for a person who has no experience trafficking, maybe a simple bank account is not a big deal, but for us a bank account really opens door, I can tell you. But in the majority of survival cases, um, it means the world. We're doing this for victims and survival. So we should analyze what works, what didn't work, and what could work, and what won't. So there are so many entities that I know and I have worked with that they are doing their best to help victims and survivors of trafficking, but they are doing this from far away. And when I say far away, I don't mean distance. What I mean is they should include survivors on their work and work with them more closely. And that's why we should hire survival to work with you and any projects that you might have that you think it will help to fight human trafficking and also to create awareness. And by creating awareness, so that that awareness can reach out all communities in all sectors. So hiring survival not only in most of the cases I said we should hire in survival just for them to tell a story that it's sometimes it's fascinating for some people, but story that we understand can help to for some people to understand some ways the problem is coming from and how can we help survivors in the financial sectors. But we should hire survival also as consultants. Survival don't want to be seen as a victim that depend on government benefits or any NGOs benefits that is provided by government grant or things like that. We really wouldn't want to be there all the time. So, and sometimes those benefits are not for all survivors. So, just for the one to qualify for, and it makes it more difficult for victims and survivors to really come out and get help, the help that they need. There are certain stages in life of a survival, and I can tell you because of me. Um, when we start like being rescued, and then when we start receiving the basics things like, let's say, a place to live, food, healthcare, all the support that we might need. The victim stage, living out of government benefits, is not what we want. We want to be independent and we want to support ourselves. We want to grow. We want to be reintegrated to the society, to be accepted for who we are and the things that we can do. We don't want to depend on benefits all the time. So we want to support ourselves. In that case, also we're going to be supporting our families. So the initiative that FAST has created to help survivors in the financial sectors is one of the most needed actions in the movement. And survival, like survival, like everybody else, come from different backgrounds, and the majority don't have a financial background or have knowledge on how to the financial world works today. So we don't have any knowledge about that. Sometimes we don't know all things that if we do and we know, that can benefit us. So some of the things that I been suggesting always is create those awareness, so people that are at risk, they can know how they can identify the problem and respond to the problem. And also that whoever is in need of help, they can reach out to anyone that can refer it for help. So having a proper training for survivors, just to understand how the different financial programs work, and how can those programs really benefit them. Um, some survivors are once I believe it, once survivors are fully trained and equipped with the right tools, hire them to reach out to other survivors or victims out there that uh, they are sometimes struggling, even after certain years of being out of the situation, of the trafficking situation, and still struggling because they don't have any structure, they don't have an idea how to really manage the financial or where to look for help. But when we create those kind of webinar and training on how to help those victims out there, that's something that will help in a big way. So sometimes survivors don't have an idea how to to make to make things work during a difficult time. So in some cases, there's survivors even without a proper identification, and survivors who were in slavery from a very early age, and they were very young when they were trafficked, so they don't know anything about credit history, or other survivors that might be severely hurt by traffickers who took advantage of the slavery situation, to use the survival informations, and in some cases open bank accounts, damage the name and identity of that person, uh, using those accounts to move money from one account to another account, or using the same account like to pay the survival, but actually taking the money and sending it to someone else. So, uh, and sometimes it's just using those accounts to move money from one country to another country. But on top of being the victims of human trafficking, also victims of money laundering, that's just crazy. And I'm glad that steps have been taken uh, to really improve and help victims and survivors of human trafficking to really make it during this difficult time. And there, we have so many survivors also that they don't even know they've been badly affected uh, uh, in their credit history, because they don't even know what credit is sometimes. And as I said, sometimes it's because there are people being in slavery uh, since they were pretty young. Other people, because of the culture varies, or maybe their background on education level, they never heard about it. So it's a good initiative that FAST is taking to really bring that information out there, and that it can reach all survivors and victims at all levels, and not only survivors, but also the stakeholders, so that they can respond to that. So we got to make sure that governments, the private sectors, that communities are involved, and that they understand how they can help and how they can be a part of it. And it's something that we need to keep in mind anytime we go anywhere, and we talk about human trafficking, and the risk that people might be at by not knowing when they encounter suspicious or transactions on, or suspicious or situation on human trafficking. So Survival, true survival involvement and inclusion is including survival from the beginning in any project that you want to do, because survivors are the ones that are going to bring their experience, their expertise, their knowledge, so to make it work, because we're doing those things for them, right? So the other thing is support survivors. We support them by providing the trainings, providing the tools, information they need to refer them where they can find help, and also help some survivors that they have their own organization that they opened. So if we support those, we are actually doing inclusion. And the last things that I want to say is hire survivors. Survival has so much to give, and as I said, we're doing all this work because of the victims and survivors are there, but we're also doing this to avoid other people become victims of human trafficking in any way. So hire survivors to work with you and pay them. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Marty, for that very incisive presentation. Certainly, I agree with you. It's not just the story of the actually human trafficking or the slavery, but also to raise awareness, as you say, as a victim, as a survivor, to ensure that persons such as yourself can be properly reintegrated in not only into society, but economically. And we know that's a challenge. So we agree with you for the call outside, not only respecting the training being provided by FAST, but also asking that others recognize that there is a need for persons who have undergone these traumatic and horrendous crimes to be accepted, to be reintegrated into society, to be hired, and that they do have an expertise that they can bring because they can give direct first-hand knowledge of how this occurs and how it can be prevented. An important aspect of this, of course, is the economic reintegration of victims of modern slavery and human trafficking. And that, of course, is impacted by the level of financial inclusion. So our next presenter is Dr. Leona Vaughan from FAST, who will present on FAST work on financial inclusion in the region. Dr. Vaughan.
Many thanks and good morning to everybody. So yes, I'll be talking about the work that we're doing at FAST in respect of financial inclusion. The financial inclusion work that we've been doing in this region really to date has focused on increasing financial access to financial services for populations who are vulnerable to modern slavery, including survivors. But we didn't just randomly select that this was an issue. One of the first steps that we took was to develop the Latin America and Caribbean Advisory Group, which actually some of my colleagues here on the screen are part of, to really advise and guide us around what the priorities are in this region. And this is a very multi-sectoral group of financial institution representatives, representatives from government, regulators and supervisors, plus survivor support organisations, non-governmental organisations and academics working in this very diverse region. And this was established in September 2021. And what that really did was help guide our work and identify 3 key areas as high risk for modern slavery. These areas were seen to potentially benefit from increased or improved financial sector involvement. So if I first talk about the Mexico pilot, we're developing a pilot in Mexico to develop and expand access for vulnerable populations, primarily survivors, within the country. The country already has what's called a tiered level of accounts. So in terms of customer due diligence, there is a very much a risk-based approach, which is, contingent with what FATF suggests should be the way that financial inclusion is progressed. Mexico already has this, but there were also additional barriers that we identified for survivors, especially those who were either returning to the country or were migrants being transited through the country, to be able to access financial services. And so as FAST does, and this is one of our strengths, I think, is we firstly convened the key actors in the country to develop a shared understanding of modern slavery and human trafficking, and the role that the financial sector can play in improving access for those at risk, but also to identify that improving access to those at risk does not compromise compliance with rules and regulations on anti-financial crime and anti-money laundering, which we know is a major concern. So that was the first piece of work that we started to develop in the region. Another area that was identified was the issue of remittances. And this was identified because it's a key source of income for many communities within the Caribbean region. And we began a pilot in October last year within the US to understand the remittance needs and usage of migrant survivors, and if they actually benefited from reduced fee access. And we're working closely here with the Western Union organization. Now, this pilot is working directly with two survivor support organizations, one in New York and one in the Carolinas. And the diversity of the migrant survivors is quite vast, actually, from Chinese right through to Latin American, Caribbean people. And we're due to report on the findings of this pilot this summer. And we plan to convene remittance service providers to share what we've learned from this. And the last piece of work that I'm going to talk about, and I'm going to talk about this a little bit more, but I'm going to explain our approach to financial inclusion first, is our research in Haiti. So Haiti, I'm sure that most of the people on this webinar will know, a highly fragile country that suffered a volley of environmental, social, and political shocks. And it was felt that this particular scenario, this context, that there wasn't enough known about what the financial landscape was like in the country. And if the needs of Haitians, including those who were returning migrants or aspiring migrants, were actually being met. And the reason why this was particularly important is that migrants, as has been identified in the global estimates on modern slavery, but also the Special Rapporteur on Contemporary Slavery has identified this, that migrants are one of the groups that's at the highest risk of exploitation. And particularly the exploitation of Haitian migrants was an issue that came up a lot with other members of the Latin America and Caribbean Advisory Group, particularly in Brazil, Venezuela, and Mexico. So they're the key pieces of work that we've been doing in this region. And like I say, I'll return to the research on Haiti to give you a little bit more insight on that. But like I mentioned before, I think it's important to explain why we focus so much on financial inclusion. So this is the Survivor Inclusion Initiative, and this began in 2019 at the same time as the report on the Financial Services Commission, which was the precursor to FAST as it exists today. And this Survivor Inclusion Initiative is a financial access project. It works directly with survivor support organizations and financial institutions to support the referral process of survivors of human trafficking and more widely modern slavery. Now, the role of FAST here really is about supporting those organizations on understanding how access can be gained for survivors to these accounts. For survivor support organizations, it's more around raising awareness that this is a possibility, that this can be done. But with financial institutions, it's very much around supporting them to understand how access can be widened without compromising their compliance with AML and AFC. So the Survivor Inclusion Initiative, as it stood from 2019, a project which worked directly in the US, the UK and Canada. It has 14 banks involved, including a bank in Austria now as well. It has 30 survivor support organizations who are actively involved, mainly in the US. And it's opened over 2,800 accounts for survivors, and most of these have been in the UK. Now, I think it was important for FAST to acknowledge that what works in these regions, so the UK, US, and Canada, wouldn't necessarily work in other contexts. And the reasons why were that contexts vary very widely. So, for example, a context where cash-based transactions are the dominant transactions, Survivor Inclusion Initiative would have to look very different in those settings. And we know that cash-based transactions are a difficulty for monitoring suspicious transactions, but they also raise a vulnerability within communities who are reliant on cash-based transactions for employment, for loans, to pay their bills or pay their rent. It increases vulnerability incredibly. We also understood that in largely rural communities who may be less well served by financial institutions, that there would be different challenges. And finally, I just want to raise this because I know it affects a number of countries in this region, that for those who are under increased monitoring by FATF, that this also brings its own specific challenges for thinking about expansion of financial inclusion. Now, the World Bank and FATF research have both shown that financial institutions can misinterpret the FATF standards in such a way that financial exclusion is created or indeed worsened. And this isn't actually just in grey-listed countries or global south countries. We've been supporting Canada on simplified due diligence, and their financial consumer body and their FIU, FinTrack, recently released, this is very recent, I think it was February actually this year, they released a technical guidance note to all financial institutions to state that they expect them to support financial inclusion for the most vulnerable in society, including survivors of modern slavery. So for those of you who are joining this webinar from an FIU, your role is very important, particularly if you have regulatory supervisory powers in this development of financial institutions understanding a risk-based approach to financial exclusion. But that being said, countries under increased monitoring, or those countries within the global south who experience high levels of de-risking, are understandably more risk averse. But on the flip side of this, simultaneously, what this does is it places already vulnerable groups at high risk of exploitation, at further risk due to financial exclusion. So, this is not something that is not backed up by research. Research has shown, and our Survivor Inclusion Initiative, in fact, has shown that there are multiple aspects of financial exclusion multiplying risks for experiencing modern slavery. And I think, as Ronnie so succinctly put it before, this is often behind the experience of survivors, desperately trying to gain access to finance for life events such as burials or weddings, or for those who maybe have been exploited in their migration journey, trying to gain access for loans to pay recruiter fees for work overseas. These are common features of survivors' stories of modern slavery and human trafficking. Many survivors who are unable to gain access to formal financial services become dependent on informal economies. And we know that these are a high risk. Informal economies, cash-based transactions, all of which make them vulnerable to being abused and exploited. And this includes being placed in debt bondage with employers quite often, or those who facilitated their employment, another common story that we hear. So financial exclusion is a consequence of the experience of being trafficked or exploited, as well as a reason behind people being trafficked and exploited. And we know this from our work with Survivor Inclusion Initiative, that survivors often lack identity documentation or formal identity documentation. This may have been taken away from them in their experience of modern slavery. They also struggle because of their status. They may be undocumented, they may be refugees, they may be migrants. The lack of a permanent address, or perhaps the unwillingness to share an address in case they're identified by their traffickers, places a challenge for them to open accounts. Trauma in and of itself can often be a huge barrier to survivors opening an account and giving control over their money to somebody else, which, you know, is almost like a replicating experience of the experience of being trafficked and exploited. And the last topic, which Ronnie also mentioned, which is around the gaining of the bad credit status, which often is linked to their experience of being trafficked or exploited. And this last one, the bad credit status, the US have just introduced the Debt Bondage Repair Act to help survivors sort of redeem their credit histories. It's the first in the world to have developed this type of legislation to support survivors of modern slavery in particular, but I doubt that it'll be the last. So just to highlight that. Well, the other aspect of, you know, this of barriers that are a result of the exploitation experience is also criminal records. So victims or survivors may have gained criminal records due to the experience of being trafficked or exploited, which then prevents them from gaining access to financial services. So these are the key things that we've learned from the Survivor Inclusion Initiative, but that can be exacerbated by additional vulnerabilities. So the experience of being in poverty or extreme poverty, or working poverty, which is often an experience, the experience of conflict or forcible displacement, as RJ mentioned, the experience of marginalization and discrimination, in particular on the basis of gender or sexuality or race or ethnicity, can all exacerbate the exclusionary aspects of financial exclusion and how that then puts people at greater risk to modern slavery. But on the flip side as well, and I don't want to make this the focus, but this is important, is that if we want to also make transactions related to modern slavery more visible in the system, the more people who are included within the system, the more likely it is that we'll be able to spot those suspicious transactions. Can I just do a time check, Chair?
You have you're a couple of minutes over, but go ahead, please.
I'll wrap up really quickly, just to mention Haiti, and this report will be coming out at the end of this month. The research was on financial vulnerabilities and trafficking in Haiti. We undertook this research with the Inter-University Institute for Research and Development, INURED, who are based in Haiti, between June and December last year. And you can see here the type of research that this was. And what we really wanted to do was explore what were the opportunities and the challenges for financial inclusion for Haiti's most vulnerable populations. Haiti recently grey listed. Also, individuals in Haiti are under targeted sanction regime by the UN. And this may cause confusion in terms of understanding of sanctions. I know that my colleague Frank will talk to this a little bit more. So a very sort of complex context for Haiti. But these are some of the things that we discovered, that there's a low trust and confidence in the formal banking system in Haiti, and therefore a preference for informal processes and informal services. There was dependency on mobile money and digital wallets, but there were also safeguarding issues around the provision of mobile money and digital wallets. And this is something that needs to be explored further. The third one, like I mentioned, there's higher trust in community informal financial services. There's easy access to informal but very expensive lenders, which also carry the risk of potentially becoming exploitative. And as the continuation of instability within the country. And finally, that the migration journey was identified as a point of increasing vulnerability to exploitation for those within the country. I won't go into this in any great detail, and I apologize for going over, but this will be a report that we will be publishing, like I say, at the end of this month.
Thank you, Dr. Vaughan, and no problem. We do have a few minutes to spare for this very interesting presentation that you gave. It's very important. Financial inclusion and by extension, financial exclusion and de-risking are all very important issues in this region and all impact us in many different ways. The Survivor Inclusion Initiative that you spoke of, we recommend it to everyone in terms of not only presenting the challenges that are faced by victims and survivors of modern slavery and human trafficking, but also in pointing to the way as to what financial institutions and other stakeholders can do to improve the situation. We look forward to the reports that you mentioned on remittances and on the financial vulnerabilities in Haiti, and would like to leave with the point that without financial access, survivors of modern slavery and human trafficking run the risk of being continually victimized and exploited. So please do your part to ensure that this does not occur, and that, you know, elements such as simplified due diligence, looking at your risk, and all these other items are taken into consideration. Up next, we have Ms. Breon Antwine, and I'm proud to say of the CFATF. And Ms. Antwine will present on understanding modern slavery in the Caribbean region, a CFATF perspective. Ms. Antwine.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. I'm just ensuring that everyone can see my screen, yes?
That's correct. You can go ahead.
Okay, great. Good morning. It gives me great pleasure to be part of this esteemed panel to present on understanding modern slavery in the Caribbean. It is a very topical and issue, and I'll get straight into the presentation because there's quite a bit to cover this morning. So this presentation will cover 5 main areas. We'll look at an overview of the CFATF, modern slavery in the context of the FATF recommendations, the CFATF work to combat modern slavery, work by regional FIUs, and finally, recommendations to address modern slavery in the Caribbean region. So let's start with the overview. So the CFATF, as most of us know, is an organization of 24 Caribbean, Central and South American countries. The main objective of the CFATF is to monitor effective implementation of and compliance with the FATF recommendations to prevent and counter money laundering, terrorist financing, and proliferation financing. The CFATF also aims to engage and work with members, FSRBs, which is FATF-style regional bodies, and other organizations to address new and existing MLTF and PF risks within the region. Within the context of modern slavery has emerged as an ML risk in the Caribbean. Now, this problem is not new, but its persistence and evolving forms, as well as the global and regional dynamics such as COVID and the economic global recession that many countries face, make the issue continuously pressing for our member countries within the CFATF. Now, modern slavery is an umbrella term that covers a set of specific concepts such as forced labor, debt bondage, sexual exploitation, human trafficking, and migrant smuggling. Within the Caribbean region, it has been found that human trafficking and the smuggling of migrants are the main forms of modern slavery that affect the region. So all of our members have criminalized these forms of modern slavery in the legislation. And in terms of penalties, they cover both imprisonment and fines. Most of the times it's both. and imprisonment terms range from 5 years to 25 years. And the fines are generally $50,000 upwards and up to $2 million within the national currency of the respective jurisdiction. All our members also have established a dedicated unit or bodies to counter modern slavery. And CFATF members have ratified the Palermo Convention either directly or through extension as overseas territories. Now, the United Nations Convention Against Transnational Crime, which is also known as the Palermo Convention, includes two important protocols: the protocol to prevent, suppress, and punish trafficking in persons, especially women and children, and the protocol against smuggling of migrants by land, sea, and air. In addition, based on the mutual evaluations that have been completed, 14 CFATF members, 11 out of those jurisdictions, those assessed jurisdictions, were rated compliant or largely compliant on recommendation 3. Now, under recommendation 3, specifically criterion 3.1, it states that countries should criminalize money laundering based on the Palermo and Vienna Conventions, which form the basis of the predicate offenses that are included in the FATF methodology. Now we know that there's a list of designated, the designated category of offenses, and this includes trafficking in human beings, migrant smuggling, and sexual exploitation. Looking at convictions, because the CFATF membership is going beyond simply criminalizing, but also into convictions. There are two cases that stand out within the region. In 2015, July 2015, we see that Rajesh Gurunani, a Jamaican businessman, was convicted of 3 counts of trafficking in persons. There were fines totaling Jamaican dollars 2.4 million and compensation to 3 victims in the same amount. And most recently, in February 2023, another Jamaican businessman was sentenced to 10 years for human trafficking. His wife, Dana Chigure, was also convicted for facilitating human trafficking and was ordered to pay Jamaican $1 million or serve 3 years. The victim will receive compensation of a little over 18,000 US dollars. Some common elements that were seen in these 2 cases were forced labor, withholding of travel documents, and false advertising of employment. So next we'll move into the second section, which is modern slavery in the context of the FATF recommendations. So the first recommendation we'll look at is recommendation 1, which is assessing and applying a risk-based approach. Countries, financial institutions, and DNSBPs should identify, assess, and understand the MLTF risks they are exposed to from modern slavery. It is important to apply the risk-based approach to ensure that measures to prevent or mitigate money laundering and terrorist financing are commensurate with the identified risks. Second is recommendation 2, which speaks to national cooperation and coordination. Countries should have national AML, CFT, and CPF policies informed by the risks. In this case, we are speaking about modern slavery, and which should be regularly reviewed and have an authority or mechanisms for coordination. All stakeholders, such as FIUs, LEAs, and competent authorities at the policymaking and operational levels should be able to coordinate, cooperate, and exchange information. Recommendation 4, which deals with confiscation and provisional measures. my apologies, recommendation 3, which is money laundering as an offense. Countries should apply the crime of money laundering to the widest range of predicate offenses, including human trafficking, smuggling of migrants, and sexual exploitation. Recommendation 4, which deals with confiscation and provisional measures. Countries should adopt measures to freeze, seize, and confiscate proceeds from or instrumentalities used in or intended for the use in money laundering or predicate offenses. Such measures should include, inter alia, carrying out provisional measures such as freezing, seizing, to prevent any dealing, transfer, or disposal of property. Next is recommendation 10, which is customer due diligence. This is extremely important because these measures should be applied to identify and verify customers, to monitor transactions over time, to determine if indicators of modern slavery exists, and to identify higher risk situations and apply the requisite measures. Reporting of suspicious transactions and tipping off is also very important, which falls under recommendations 20 and 21. If a financial institution suspects or has reasonable grounds to suspect that the funds are proceeds of criminal activities, which in this case would cover human trafficking, migrant smuggling, sexual exploitation, or forced labor, then it should be required by law to report these suspicions promptly to the FIU. Next is CDD and other measures for DNFBPs. So similar to recommendation 10, these measures must apply to DNFBPs when they are carrying out particular transactions. Recommendations 30 and 31 cover the responsibilities and powers of law enforcement agencies, and countries should ensure that designated LEAs have the responsibility for money laundering investigations within the framework of national AML and CFT policies. Designated LEAs should develop a proactive parallel financial investigation when pursuing money laundering and associate predicate offenses. Competent authorities should also be able to obtain access to all necessary documents and information for use in those investigations and prosecutions and related actions. Other powers that LEAs should have include a wide range of investigative techniques, process to identify assets without prior notice to the owner, and identification of who controls accounts. The final set of recommendations that are relevant to modern slavery is international cooperation. Given the cross-border and often international nature of modern slavery and human trafficking and smuggling of migrants, international cooperation is a cornerstone that enables jurisdictions to cooperate and share information that can lead to, that can boost investigations and lead to convictions within different countries. So next, we look at CFATF's work to combat modern slavery. And this will mainly center around its typologies reports that were done in 2014 and 2021. So the 2014 financial flows from human trafficking report was done, and it collected data from 2007 to 2011. And the objective of this report was to increase the understanding and raise regional awareness on human trafficking and smuggling of migrants and related MLTF techniques within the Caribbean region. This report was based on responses received from 20 countries, 15 of which were English-speaking and 5 were Spanish-speaking countries. Now, what was found is that human trafficking and smuggling of migrants are criminalized in most jurisdictions. At that point in time, it was 85% for human trafficking and 60% for the smuggling of migrants. 94% of the respondents indicated that they have special investigative units for human trafficking. 60% of the countries have conducted investigations and have had prosecutions regarding human trafficking and smuggling of migrants. However, only 20% of the countries were able to link funds to these activities. Continuing with the 2014 report, there were 580 investigations, 338 into human trafficking, and 170 into the smuggling of migrants, with 95 convictions, my apologies, 82 for human trafficking and 13 for smuggling of migrants. There was also found to be a low-level filing of STRs and SARs related to human trafficking and smuggling of migrants. Of the 20 respondents, only 3 countries reported to have received STRs or SARs related directly to these activities, and only a total of 21 of these were recorded for the period 2008 to 2011. Well, those that were submitted to the report. The report also found that there was no or limited knowledge by competent authorities on how to conduct HT and SOM investigations, SOM being smuggling of migrants. These competent authorities were identified as Immigration, Customs, Coast Guard, and police authorities. And most of the human trafficking and smuggling of migrant investigations had an element of sexual exploitation. So the second financial flows from human trafficking report was done in 2021. And this was an online questionnaire that was sent out to CFATF membership that sought data from the period 2017 to 2019. And in this report, responses were received from 16 English-speaking jurisdictions. So it was found that 81% of the respondents considered the threat of human trafficking or smuggling of migrants in their national risk assessment or another risk assessment. And 46% of these respondents identified the risk as high for human trafficking. 94% indicated that human trafficking and smuggling of migrants is a crime in their country. There were 280 investigations with 131 prosecutions and 54 convictions over the 2017 to 2019 period. And similar to the 2014 report, human trafficking and smuggling of migrants were concentrated around sexual exploitation and in addition to forced labor and services. Again, there was a low number of STR and SAR filings, with the most from banks and MS and money service businesses. 88% of the countries reported that they have units responsible for investigating human trafficking and smuggling of migrants. That is similar to the 2014 report, yet only 19% of respondents indicated that there were assets seized from these activities. And 75% of the respondents were identified as being net importers of the victims of human trafficking and smuggling of migrants. Coming out of the 2021 report, some very important ML indicators in relation to human trafficking and smuggling of migrants were identified. These included the utilization of cash-intensive businesses, such as bars and restaurants, the utilization of third-party accounts for laundering illicit proceeds from human trafficking, transactions of equivalent value or amounts separated by a small difference, multiple individuals sending to one beneficiary for various reasons, and remittance of funds to high-risk jurisdictions related to human trafficking. Continuing with the CFATF's work to combat modern slavery, The work has also centered on some very important publications. The CFATF publishes monthly publications on its website, and there have been 2 publications that have dealt specifically with human trafficking or modern slavery. In May 2022, there was an article named "The Importance of International and Domestic Cooperation in Combating Migrant Smuggling," and in December 2022, "Recent Trends in Modern Slavery in the Caribbean." And these are published to raise awareness of different aspects that deal with modern slavery within our region among the membership. Also, within the CFATF Insights newsletter, there have been 2 articles as well. In April 2019, which was the inaugural issue of the CFATF newsletter, there was an article titled "The Illicit Financial Flows and Human Trafficking," and also in June 2020, "Modern Slavery as a Financial Crime in the Caribbean." So I hope that members are familiar with these, because these are very much available to them on the website and from the CFATF newsletter. Going on to collaborations, the CFATF continues to work, and I know Dr. Vaughan had spoken about this, the Survivor Inclusion Initiative, Latin America and Caribbean Region Working Group. There's continued collaboration with this working group in the projects that Dr. Vaughan had described so much in detail earlier. And also in 2019, the Liechtenstein Initiative for a Financial Sector Commission on Modern Slavery and Trafficking. The CFATF, represented by Executive Director Dawn Spicer, served as a commissioner on this project. Our collaborations continue. We have, the CFATF, has collaborated in a number of ways with a number of organizations regarding trafficking in persons and modern slavery. Ranging from, in 2020, the UNODC Compendium on Public-Private Partnerships to Prevent and Counter Trafficking in Persons. And there were several collaborations in 2021. In July, the UN High-Level Political Forum on Modern Slavery and Human Trafficking. In September, the Inter-American Development Bank Fourth Technical Dialogue in Trafficking in Persons. And in November 2021, there was a high-level meeting of the General Assembly on the appraisal of the UN Global Plan of Action to Combat Trafficking in Persons. Now let's go to regional work to combat modern slavery and the financial intelligence. And this regional work really focuses on the work of financial intelligence units and the typologies that have been produced as a result of their efforts. And we will look at the Financial Intelligence Unit of Trinidad and Tobago that presented 2 very comprehensive cases coming out of their financial flows, a human trafficking perspective, which were extracts from their strategic analysis case compilation for the period 2015 to 2020. Now, these 2 cases were sanitized cases, and here we present a summary. Here I present a summary of the first case, where there was an individual who had an employment record, that he was a low-income earner. He had a personal bank account, which regularly had a small minimum balance. He had multiple addresses and started a business described as a guest house and bar. And when he approached another financial institution to open a business account, he was denied based on the enhanced CDD measures. Yet in 2 years, Mr. X frequently deposited large amounts of cash in excess of $1.7 million into his personal account at Bank A. There were frequent outgoing wire transfers to a Miss Y from a European country, and also expenditure on personal items. So based on this case, there were several money laundering indicators identified, and an individual with multiple addresses, establishment of a cash-intensive business or several cash-intensive businesses, large frequent cash deposits into personal accounts, which normally maintain a minimum balance, and frequent outgoing wire transfers to unrelated individuals in another jurisdiction. In the second case, again, coming out of the FIUTT, remember these are sanitized cases, so the names are very creative. An individual named Female Queen was the head of a human trafficking operating in a high-risk country for for this crime. And this individual, together with other persons located in high-risk human trafficking territories, used local money service businesses to send high volumes of cash to an individual identified as Female 1, right? Who is also the resident of another country known as a source country for human trafficking. None of the senders seem to have any relationship with the receiver, Female 1. The indicators that came out of this particular typology was the transfers of high volumes of cash below the reporting threshold, use of third parties to move criminal proceeds, transfers from several persons to one common receiver with whom they have no discernible relationship, use of intricate networks to hide the true source of funds, transfers sent by transfers sent by a person who is known to be involved in the human trafficking trade. Finally, we look at recommendations, and these recommendations, some of them are coming from the CFATF Financial Flows for Human Trafficking Report 2021. So please, members, feel free to look at that report as well. The first is the development of a Caribbean human trafficking and smuggling of migrants task force among FIUs, specialized training courses, and mentoring for investigators and analysts with regards to these crimes, setting up of a regional data repository for human trafficking and smuggling of migrant statistics, training of reporting entities on identifying indicators and red flags for human trafficking and smuggling of migrants, public-private partnerships between FIU, law enforcement, and reporting entities to enhance reporting of these crimes as well. In addition, awareness and educational campaigns to sensitize the broader civil society, very important, so that they too can help and they too can assist in identifying human trafficking and smuggling of migrant activities by knowing what are the indicators and red flags, effective recording of data to accurately assess risks and develop the commensurate mitigation measures, issuing of guidance documents to reporting entities so that there are clarifications of expectations when using SARs and STRs to report modern slavery and human trafficking by competent authorities and regulatory authorities. This would also help to significantly increase reporting. And publication of modern slavery and human trafficking based on focused typologies, as these typologies usually summarize the typical patterns of conduct based on existing financial sector reporting, right? So these recommendations should go a long way in mitigating and addressing modern slavery as it appears in our Caribbean region and among the CFATF membership. I thank you very much for having me, and I turn you back over to our moderator, Ms. Dawn Spicer.
Thank you very much, Ms. Antwine, for that informative update. As you can see, it is clear that our CFATF members are doing a lot of work in this area of modern slavery and human trafficking, not only in the enactment of laws, but also implementation through prosecutions and convictions. But yet more needs to be done. So please, for all of you out there listening and involved in FIUs and prosecution investigation in AML CFT, know that more needs to be done. Importantly raised is the risk-based approach. And this, of course, is an important aspect of countering money laundering to understand what the level of risk is for these crimes within your jurisdiction. It's now my pleasure to introduce Mr. Simon Zorg of FAST, who will present on why and how to include modern slavery in national risk assessments. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dawn. Can you confirm that you see my screen?
Yes, I do.
Thank you so much. And also a warm welcome from my side. My name is Simon Zaug. As Dawn introduced me, I am the anti-money laundering specialist of the FAST initiative. And before joining FAST, I worked for the Swiss Financial Intelligence Unit. So I got a FIU background. And I think this topic now on national risk assessments and why is it important, how can we include modern slavery in these NRAs, is a perfect transition also from the presentation before, because of course it relates to recommendation 1 of the FATF. So basically what we did within FAST was an analysis of national risk assessments worldwide in December 2021. We analyzed 27 NRAs from all the regions in the world. And what did we want to find out? We wanted to find out to what degree is human trafficking, modern slavery addressed in NRAs. So basically we had 3 categories. First one is human trafficking is not addressed at all in NRAs. Second category was it is mentioned, but only on a very cursory, superficial level. And then the last category was countries address human trafficking in NRAs, which means that they really go into detail. They might dedicate a chapter within the NRA to this important topic. Our results of this analysis showed that around 30% of the analyzed NRAs address human trafficking and modern slavery. So this means around 1/3 goes into details when it comes to this crime. But this also means that 70% of the analyzed NRAs, they don't go into detail. So they either just mention human trafficking, modern slavery, or they do not mention it at all. And even within these 30%, so where human trafficking is addressed, the numbers that we see in the NRAs are very low regarding human trafficking. So suspicious activity reports, investigations, prosecutions, convictions, these numbers are all very, very low. As we also just saw in the presentation by Ms. Brion Antoine, that number of SARS in the Caribbean region are very low. So this kind of corroborates what we saw in our analysis. Now, you could say also, why is this a bad thing that only 30% address human trafficking in NRAs and that the numbers are so low? So we assume, and I think it's very fair to say, that there is an obvious gap between the worldwide estimates and the numbers that we then see in the national risk assessments. I just checked this morning a few numbers from the Global Slavery Index, which is a document, a report from 2018. It will be updated this year. It's from Walk Free, an Australian NGO that estimates numbers of human trafficking in countries. And from the Caribbean region, not to single out any countries, I just randomly selected 3. It's the Dominican Republic. There are an estimated 42,000 people living in modern slavery and human trafficking. Jamaica, 7,000 estimated victims in 2018, and Haiti, 59,000. So when you have these figures in mind, and also, of course, the 50 million people worldwide estimated to live in these conditions, and then we see the very low amount of SARS, of convictions, of investigations, I mean, something is not right. And that's where the NRA comes in, because the NRA is a very strong, very important tool to as for the basis and to determine a country's priorities in the fight against money laundering, terrorism financing, and its predicate offenses. So it's important for the authorities, for the public sector, for the regulator, for FIUs, but of course also, and we will see this later on, it's also important for the private sector, for financial institutions that conduct their own risk assessment. They take the national risk assessment as a basis. So basically a lot starts with the addressing of human trafficking, modern slavery in national risk assessments, because it's a vicious circle, right? We don't have the data. The number of SARS, for instance, is very low. Then countries look at these numbers, they assume it's a low priority or not a priority at all, which means, again, that not enough data is created because just the awareness is not high enough. So this is this vicious circle that somehow we have to break in order to make this crime a priority, because it is obviously a priority, or it has to be a priority. So the question now is, how can this be done if the number of SARS and just the other classical figures we look at are not representative for the prevalence or the extent of the crime? What FAST is doing currently is drafting a report together with the three large national risk assessment methodology providers, which is a World Bank, International Monetary Fund, and Council of Europe. These are the three large methodology providers. So countries usually use these methodologies when they are drafting and developing a national risk assessment. And the goal of this report, this guidance we call it, is to first of all raise awareness of the topic, but then of course also second and even more probably importantly, provide guidance. So the how, show the countries how this can be done in an alternative way to gather, to collect qualitative and quantitative data from human trafficking and modern slavery. We especially concentrate there on the threats and the vulnerabilities, and I will just explain now why we are doing this. But just to mention that this report will be published in the first half of this year, and then it would be, of course, great if you consult this document when you will be developing your next national risk assessment. So just to remind us of the key terms, because it's important, the risk, right? What we have at the end is the function of three factors, basically, of the threat, the vulnerability, and the consequence. Consequence here, we focus less on it. We focus more on the threat and the vulnerability. The threat, a person or group of people, object, or activity with the potential. That's the important word, the potential to cause harm to, for example, the state, society, or the economy. Typically serves as an essential starting point in developing an understanding of money laundering and terrorism financing risk. And that's exactly the reason why we concentrate on the threats on the one hand, because it's the starting point of the process. The second important focus is vulnerability, that comprises those factors that can be exploited by the threat or that may support or facilitate its activities. So focus is on factors that represent weaknesses in the AML-CFT systems or controls or certain features of the country. So having these definitions of the key terms in mind, just the explanation why we focus on especially threat. So we show in this guidance the countries how to identify threats of human trafficking, modern slavery, and how to identify vulnerabilities of human trafficking or in the system of AML-CFT of the country, that then could mean that the threat could have an impact, of course, because the barriers are just not there. And we concentrate on those two because it's the first stage. It's a stage of identification where countries basically come up with the main threats. And that's important, that human trafficking, modern slavery is assessed or identified there. or at least looked at, and then to check if it is really one of the major threats. And if this is the case, then of course the process can go on. So already some examples that are presented in the guidance that will be published in the first half of this year, as I said. On first point is on how to better identify human trafficking threats. So the key point. Of course, these elements here, these points here, could also be important when identifying the vulnerabilities. For instance, the first point is to consult publicly available information sources. For instance, the Global Slavery Index I just mentioned when giving some examples of estimated numbers of people living in modern slavery for some countries of the region. So there are great examples of publicly available information sources, like also the global estimates of modern slavery, which is a report by ILO, IOM, and also Walk Free. So to use these informations to identify the threat, but of course it could also be used to identify vulnerabilities. It depends, of course, on the type of the source. Then it's very important to include stakeholders outside of the traditional AML CFT players in the development process of the NRA. So include NGOs, include survivors. We heard Mr. Ronnie Marty earlier on who said, include the survivors. They have a unique expertise, a unique point of perspective to bring into this whole discussion. Also bring in the National Anti-Trafficking Coordinator, a very valuable person with a source of information, with a wealth of information on the topic. Of course, also there, it depends on what stakeholders you include to then define if it's rather on threats or vulnerabilities. Also, a possibility is to gather information from similar jurisdictions. So similar means that it is are those jurisdictions that have similar economic, social, geographic, or other contextual factors that might already have come up with an NRA, and they included human trafficking, modern slavery. So gather information from those jurisdictions. And the last point, under this category, identify the threats, is to learn from other underreported crime. I mean, as I now have very clearly said, it is an underreported crime, but there are others like environmental crimes, like proliferation financing. We can learn from these crimes how countries deal with such underreported crimes, to also learn then how to better identify the threats of human trafficking and modern slavery. And then the vulnerabilities. There, it's important to focus on timely and effective information sharing, coordination and cooperation processes on national and international level. So to identify if there might be weaknesses, as I defined vulnerabilities, if the threats identified could have then an impact because we don't have timely and effective information sharing, coordination, and cooperation processes in place. That could be one vulnerability to look at. Focus on platforms to share lessons learned and best practices across the region. Of course, the FSRBs, the CFATF, of course, is a great body to use and to share these lessons learned and to learn also from the past. And then we heard about this, we talked about this, of course, focus on financial inclusion of vulnerable group, identify if financial inclusion might be an issue in the country. There are great examples of NRAs that discuss basically the issue of financial inclusion or the issue of financial exclusion, which could, of course, lead to a high risk of being exploited. So these are examples on how hopefully in the future, if looking at threats, looking at vulnerabilities, that the human trafficking related money laundering risks are more comprehensively addressed in future NRAs. So thank you very much, and back to you, Dawn.
Thank you very much for that, Simon. Again, as is stated by both Ms. Antoine and yourself, the importance of doing risk assessments. It's something that countries, the CFATF member countries, are doing on an ongoing basis because, of course, national risk assessments, sectoral risk assessments must be updated. So it is important, as you mentioned, to have a detailed look at modern slavery and human trafficking, because it would help towards not only raising awareness, but ensuring that something is done to address the problem. We are a bit over before our break, but we have one question here in the chat for you. This is all from a Mr. Lal, and that question is in terms of, if you can, you mentioned the 3 countries, Dominican Republic, Jamaica, and Haiti, where there are high levels of persons under modern slavery. And he was wondering if you had an idea of the nationalities of those persons. So I think he's interested in getting an idea of where the migrants or the victimized persons are coming from into those jurisdictions. Thank you.
To put it very, very shortly, because I know I'm standing between you and the break. So there are sources online. There's, for instance, a UNODC report, and I will share the link in the Q&A function, where countries basically report to the UNODC on the victims' statistics and also perpetrator statistic. To be honest, I don't know by heart, of course, these specific 3 nationalities. I would need to check, or I will share the link, and then hopefully regarding these countries, we have the concrete nationalities. And there are other sources, just to mention. One is the Trafficking in Persons report by the State Department of the United States of the USA. It's an annual report, and it basically ranks every country into different tiers, and there is sometimes some valuable information about victims' nationalities. Thank you, Leona, for posting the link.
Yes, and thank you. And we look forward, and members out there, all interested persons who are attending this webinar, please look out for the guidance with regard to the national risk assessments that's coming up and will be published. It's very important and would be a good assistance in this area on focusing on modern slavery and human trafficking. It is now my pleasure to invite and introduce Dr. Frank Habistro from FAST to discuss how to better detect suspicions of modern slavery.
Thank you, Dawn. Please, if you could confirm that you see my screen, that would be nice.
Yes, I can.
Excellent. Thank you. Well, as you all know, the crimes we're talking about are crimes that are happening in the shadows. This is all human trafficking, modern slavery activities share that common feature. And victims will often not seek the help of authorities. So for your countries, financial intelligence will often be the only starting point for criminal investigations. Now, to harness that potential, and I want to say that very clearly, you depend actually on your financial industries. So I think that for you as public officials, it is therefore extremely important to understand what is possible from a financial industry's perspective, what you can expect from your financial industry players, and what you can promote, be it in your role as ministries, as supervisors, or FIUs. My professional background is actually in the financial industry, and I was the lead of the German Public-Private Partnership workstream on human trafficking before joining FAST. So I really want to focus on what has proven relevant and effective in practice. There are basically 4 areas of activity where banks can become active when fighting modern slavery. One is governance, risk analysis, and policies. Then we have training and awareness, cooperation, inclusion, and social responsibility, and the field of customer due diligence and transaction monitoring. All of those are obviously interrelated to a certain extent, and all are important for AFC. And therefore, I'm going to mention a few central activities for all of them. But as from an anti-financial crime perspective, the latter one is probably the most relevant. We will go into that aspect into more detail. So the first is governance, risk analysis, and policies. As you know, every financial institution has to perform an institute-specific risk analysis. And here it would be important if they would consider modern slavery and human trafficking risks next to other risks they may identify. Because whatever's identified in this institute-specific risk analysis has to be sufficiently mitigated by compliance measures, as it is the foundation of the entire AFC framework a bank has. And in this way, it's also a reflection of the risk-based approach mentioned by Brion before. As it is so essential for the AFC framework, specific measures will follow that a bank implements. So if you can in a way promote that banks implemented, you will have this multiplier effect of measures and mitigating measures and identifying measures that will help you find modern slavery in your country. What's the best way to do that? Well, Simon already mentioned it before. Once you have it in your national risk assessment, banks usually will, in a way, copy-paste it because they have to react to that into the institute-specific risk analysis, and you will have this multiplier effect of mitigating measures in your country. Then it's also important that financial institutions are clear on procedures to address human trafficking and modern slavery-related cases. What do I mean with that? Well, for instance, the client relationship staff has to know what to do in a case of a direct suspicion of human trafficking. So imagine someone is going to open an account and they feel, okay, this could be a human trafficking situation. This person doesn't seem to make it very freely. What do? Shall they open the account in order to allow police investigators to investigate? Should they deny the opening of the account? Then to whom do they report? Within the bank, do they report it via a suspicious activity report only, maybe also to specific police forces? So there are a lot of questions that banks have to clear beforehand. Then on the field of training and awareness, 2 points. Modern slavery should be highlighted as central predicate offense or source of income when it comes to terrorist financing in periodic money laundering and terrorist financing staff trainings. And financial institutions should have also specific trainings that deal exclusively with human trafficking risks and that ideally involve survivors. So what is true for the state when we say that survivors are an important source both of knowledge and when it comes to give the crime a face, this is also true for financial institutions, and they can involve survivors as well in their trainings. Why is it so important that the staff of a bank is actually trained? Well, because often, besides all of the artificial intelligence and big data and technology we're talking of, suspicions often arise from personal contact with persons. And for that, you don't have technical indicators. For that, you only have a trained human to identify. In this context, I would also like to use the opportunity to announce that FAST is going to launch a self-assessment tool for financial institutions. This self-assessment tool allows financial institutions to answer different yes/no questions. And based on that, they receive a tailor-made report with recommendations on how to improve their AML framework regarding human trafficking. So once it is launched, we will share it certainly with CFATF so that you can help to promote it within your area. Then on cooperation, inclusion, and social responsibility. It was already mentioned how important public-private partnerships are. We learned that the CFATF also recommended as part of this framework of fighting modern slavery. We are going to go into detail on public-private partnerships later on. And then there's the other element. We also already heard it from Leona, and this is to make sure that business risk appetite decisions do not lead to the so-called de-risking. This is a focus of the FATF, and they consider it as well as unwanted. So banks should be very clear about that to avoid it, not to avoid risk, but to manage risk. That should be the approach. So now on customer due diligence and transaction monitoring, which will be the focus of this presentation. I would like to start this topic by introducing you to a concept, and this concept is the modern slavery high-risk client. What's the idea of the modern slavery high-risk client? Well, in a way, it's the same as we know from money laundering. We have the high-risk client concept based on high-risk industries combined with high-risk countries. And we considered fast that it would be a wise approach to use that logic and to build a modern slavery high-risk client as well, looking at high-risk industries from a modern slavery perspective and or high-risk countries as well from a modern slavery perspective. Why and or, not only and? Well, there are industries like the red light industries where we can say we already have a high risk regardless of the country involved. What do we do when we have a modern slavery high-risk client? Well, basically the same a bank would do with a money laundering high-risk client. We will have to adapt, apply enhanced due diligence, and put this person or institution under increased monitoring when it comes to transactions they perform. When looking into high-risk industries, there are a number of them, mining, garment, construction, you name it. And you will find a dedicated list with industry code, so it's really easy to implement for banks. In a report we are going to launch as well within the next 1 or 2 months. This report will be shared with you as well. Then, as I've said, we need, on the one hand, we need this high-risk industry, on the other hand, we need a high-risk country. And for the CFATF region, we identified a number of countries that are especially relevant. I would like to highlight the title of this slide. So it's high-risk countries for the CFATF region, not high-risk countries of the CFATF region. So depending on nationalities of perpetrators, victims, and countries where victims have been repatriated, we can in a way say, okay, it looks like that your region has specific links or more likely links to other countries in the world when it comes to human trafficking, and maybe it might be sensible to focus on a risk-based approach on economic transactions related to those. This can lead to your banks using that as a list of high-risk countries, but it shouldn't be only that. It has to be complemented by what your specific country identifies as especially affected nationalities, as well as what the CFATF identifies, maybe in newsletter, articles, and monthly publications mentioned. Now, the modern slavery high-risk client is not only important for customer due diligence, but also for monitoring transactions. And to understand why that is so important, let me start by just remembering together where how suspicious transactions lead to convictions of modern slavers. Well, starting point is obviously the financial institution. You have a number of incoming transactions, you have a number of outgoing transactions, but you also have transactions that are forwarded for other banks within correspondent banking. And there are banks out there that which perform millions of those transactions every day. And as you know, for money laundering, it's simply humanly not possible to look at all of them, and therefore we need a monitoring system which on an automated basis, by using indicators and by looking into specific patterns, filters out some of those transactions so that a compliance officer, a person, a human, can look into them and ask if they make sense, if they are plausible, who actually the counterparts are, and so on. And if this person considers that the plausibility is not given, the compliance officer is going to file a suspicious activity report. This is going to be submitted to the FIU. The FIU is going to enhance it with information from other suspicious activity reports, maybe from police databases as well. It's forwarded to the authorities. They are going to start an investigation. And this might lead to the interdiction of the criminal. So this picture, what I think, what it makes very clear is that the monitoring system is quite literally a bottleneck. And it shows why indicators are so important, because whatever doesn't make it through this monitoring system, you are not going to see it. So neither you nor the banks. And if you're not going to see it, you will never indict, convict a perpetrator based on suspicious transactions. Now, the current situation of indicators, call it the indicator landscape, is quite a difficult one. And we see two characteristics of indicators currently. On the one side, we have those that are only suitable for the human analysis by the compliance officer. So what we saw in the picture, what happens after the filter, and others that you can use for the automated transaction monitoring are in a way identical to what we already have for money laundering. So in a way, it never goes. It's never going to reach that compliance officer so that the person can assess it based on indicators we already have. So nobody's going to see it, and the indicators we have are simply not useful. Or it goes through the filter, but it's going to be treated as a money laundering case. It's going to be reported maybe as a money laundering case, and therefore maybe not treated with importance it should be treated with. So to sum it up, relevant transactions are not detected, suspicious activity reports are not filled, and the perpetrators are not held accountable because of that. Now, to change that, the modern slavery high-risk client is quite important. And we want to combine this concept with already existing money laundering indicators that banks use to make it easy for banks as well. Now, what you see here is an example that shows why you can confuse money laundering transaction patterns with modern slavery transaction patterns, because what you see here, most of you will recognize it, is a typical case of channeling. You have several actors that pay the same amount to a bank's client, be it a person or a company, and the sum of all of those transactions are forwarded to a third party within a few days. Now, this does not have to be a money laundering activity. It could be modern slavery as well. Take, for instance, online child sexual exploitation. In online child sexual exploitation, you have cases where live transmissions of abuses are filmed, and perpetrators can, so the perpetrators on the left side, can watch online how this abuse is performed. In this case, the perpetrators pay, like here, the same amount to a platform, a provider, a video provider, and the income is forwarded, the sum, to the ones, to the perpetrators actually generating this material. It can also be a case of forced labor combined with debt bondage. So what we can see here, in this case, the persons on the left would be the victims, paying the same amount of rent for a living provided by the exploiting company. And the amount is then forwarded to the criminals in the background. You see the same structure, technically speaking, as money laundering and as other modern slavery activities as well. So now, as banks already have indicators to detect that, an easy approach would just be to copy the indicator and to add the requirement that if the one in the middle, your client, is a modern slavery high-risk client, then you would have an indicator that shows you that this could potentially be modern slavery and that you should investigate in this direction. Because imagine if the one here in your case, in your countries, could be a Middle American construction company. If you see that from such a client, I mean, the probability that it could be modern slavery is quite high. I think this is reasonable to say, and it makes sense to further investigate that. The same is true for the other example I gave with the online child sexual exploitation. In this case, you can remodify your indicator by saying, okay, you also require, you have this special requirement that the ones receiving the money in the end, so the perpetrators actually generating the material, come from the Philippines. Because I'm quoting UNICEF here, the Philippines are the epicenter of the global production of such material. So again, here, if you see such a construction specifically sending money to the Philippines and not to an offshore location, so to say, then there's a probability, I think, to consider online child sexual exploitation being involved. Then what can also be done is to combine this high-risk client, this modern slavery high-risk client, with a dedicated search for countries that are in a crisis situation, be it an ongoing crisis or an emerging one, because many of those crises lead to increased numbers of modern slavery activities as well, because they go hand in hand with increased vulnerabilities of affected populations. So it's certainly sensible to say, or to look into an increase of total amounts, an increase of single transactions, an increase of high volume transactions, going to those countries, or that showing some kind of relation to those countries. So it's about to have a profile of the client and to look into relevant changes. Just to make it more visible, more clear, take as high-risk client someone from the red light industry, brothel, and if you have such a client as a bank and they change their behavior in a way that transactions to Venezuela just explode in a certain point, I think it's also reasonable to think that modern slavery could be involved. Those indicators I showed you that was in a way very superficial. We have in this report, I mentioned very detailed explanations on how those indicators can be designed and implemented. So certainly something useful to share with your financial industry. And with that, back to you, Dawn.
Thank you so very much, Frank. That was indeed interesting in terms of being better able to detect suspicions of money laundering, because we know that has a direct impact in terms of the filing of suspicious transaction and suspicious activity reports. I see that we have a question here in the chat before we move on with your other presentation. I don't know if you'd like to take an attempt at it. It's from Alison Lewis, and she's pointing out that essentially sometimes the victims of human trafficking may not know the perpetrator. The perpetrator may be someone lower down in the chain, or it may be an innocent person get caught up in the whole transaction. What she's trying to find out is how can we go about trying to identify persons higher up in the criminal chain as it pertains to human trafficking?
So this is an excellent question. I think if we look into the victim's financial activities, and the victim doesn't know the perpetrator, we will most probably not see any transactions between the victim and the perpetrator. So there, I don't see many possibilities from a mere transaction monitoring perspective. But still, I think most cases, victims know their perpetrators. And in many cases, we already heard that before, victims are also used for even for money laundering activities, not only for the actual exploitation regarding modern slavery. So there you might see transactions going from the account of the victim to other accounts, and then you can build respective financial intelligence based on that.
Great. I think that's an excellent answer and response. And yes, indeed, in many instances, they are aware of who the perpetrators are or the chain of perpetrators. I will now invite you to go into your second presentation, which is on the importance of public-private partnerships.
Yes. Again, can you see it?
Yes, I can confirm it's there.
Excellent. So public-private partnerships, we already heard it from other presenters, are emerging. You should implement such public-private partnerships, and they are really a global trend. What you see here are just a few examples. But first of all, to really explain what a public-private partnership is, a public-private partnership can consist of a mix of two or more public and private entities, and they work together to strive for specific goals as part of the overarching aims of preventing and addressing trafficking and in persons. And participation in such a PPP is always voluntary and collaborative. And I think it's especially important for you as public officials to understand that financial institutions and public sector entities have to meet here as equals. So otherwise you will not be able to engage the financial industry in the long run. Why is it such a powerful tool? Well, I think because the right persons are sitting on the table to define what to actually you have to look for on the one side. So this was like the main message that the public officials can give. And at the same time, you already can see, okay, is this actually possible to look into that detail or a specific pattern? Because the financial industry will be able to tell you, okay, this is technically doable. And to create something based on this direct exchange is extremely efficient. Here, just a few examples we have of very different PPPs, I must say. We have, for instance, Gimlet, which is the UK PPP. They have a rather operational form of collaboration, so they are able to share names of perpetrators. Then we have AFGA, this is the German PPP. Here you have a rather strategic collaboration because the German laws don't allow for exchange of operational data, but they can create indicators and best practices that are shared within the entire industry. Then you have Samlet in South Africa, which is in a way something in between Gimlet and AFGA due to the legal options. And then you have this new development, and this is EFIP, which is the internationalization of PPPs. So cross-border PPPs with police forces like Europol and the world's leading banks. EFIP is going to launch a human trafficking project this April with the help of FAST as well. And so we are really looking forward to that. And the result will hopefully be a report that we are also will be also able to share with you. As I said, it's a global trend, and your country should become a part of that trend. And you are, in a way, in a comfortable situation if you haven't done so far, because there is already a lot of experience and good practices. And you can refer to a first guidance to this compendium of the UNODC that was already mentioned, and to which CFATF also contributed to avoid like the big mistakes others have already made. What does this compendium cover? Very, very different aspects, like how to assure support from top, how do you actually share data in a secure and data protection laws compliant manner, and how to grow as an organization. You know, sometimes it's better to start step by step than to want too much from the beginning. And while saying that, such a PPP does not have to limit itself on human trafficking. You can create one for all types of anti-financial crime, but if you want to do so, to start with human trafficking is certainly a good idea, because you have usually the counterparts are especially engaged. Everyone understands the importance, and it's easy to create new approaches. So it's just also a good starting point if you want to create a PPP as a concept for your entire national AFC framework. One of our purposes as FAST is to support you in building your own PPP. So please reach out to us. We are here to help. This is the reason why we exist. And with that, again, back to you, Dawn.
Okay, thank you, Frank, for that on what is a very important concept that is being rolled out globally in terms of public-private partnerships, understanding that for crime in general and for solutions to crime and challenges, but in this instance, more importantly, in terms of modern slavery and human trafficking, the importance of ensuring that both the public and private sectors come together and collaborate on this. This is specifically an area where that is absolutely needed for those two parties or sectors to be on board. I see a quick question in the chat here asking about collaboration, if there's any collaboration between law enforcement agencies and tip line operators. I'm not sure if anyone wants to tackle that, if anyone is aware as to whether or not that's going on. So I would open the floor to who would like to answer Mr. Lal's question.
Well, if you want, I can do that. There are PPPs out there that collaborate with such tip lines, especially on the mentioned online child sexual exploitation field. Canada is doing that. The United States are doing that, and I think the Philippines and Thailand, which are especially affected countries, are doing that as well. And there's also a platform of tip lines. I don't remember the name right now, but it's the platform of tip lines globally, which also exchange data on online child sexual exploitation. So this is a field where I'm aware of such forms of collaborations.
For that very much. So Mr. Lal, I hope that has answered your question sufficiently. We will now move on and invite Mr. Zog Simon back to present on FAST AML roundtable events, the role of assessors, and also finally to give a brief overview of the online training certificate for FIUs. Simon?
Thank you so much, Dawn. Can you please, for a last time, confirm that you can see the screen?
I can absolutely see the screen in your presentation.
Oh, good. I'm all set to start. Then for the last 10-15 minutes or the last part of this webinar, I would cover 3 more topics after having already, we have already addressed different topics, and I would cover 3 more topics that FAST works on and that we believe are relevant for the Caribbean region. So Dawn, if you allow me, I would just cover these 3 topics in one row, and then we might see if we have questions at the end, or otherwise we will directly go to Daniel then for the closing remarks, if that's fine for you.
That is fine, okay. Simon, please
Perfect.
proceed.
To make your work also easier. So the first topic will be the AML roundtables that FAST is organizing and has been organizing. So what are those roundtable events for the financial sector? We started in February 2022, and until now, so as of March 2023, we have organized 7 roundtable events, reaching over 550 participants in total. We started actually these roundtables event in Latvia at the beginning of February. And I mean, if you hear February 2022, you might think directly also of the war in Ukraine, which started, I believe, on the 24th of February 2022. And we then believed, as a good reaction to that war in Ukraine and the increased risk of people, especially women and children, being exploited, that we could then concentrate these roundtable events to the neighboring countries of the Ukraine. So we went to Hungary, that was a virtual event, but we had an event with Hungary. We had also events in Moldova and Romania, as well as in Poland. So I think the only neighboring country of Ukraine we did not cover is Slovakia. We also then had events in Germany, in Austria, and in South Africa. So South Africa was the first event outside of Europe. And the results are very, very promising. And maybe I also have to say that so far we haven't had any events in the Caribbean region. There have been some discussions going on with countries, but nothing concrete yet. But of course, we are happy to receive requests also. And what we usually do is partner up with an authority, but it can also be a private sector representative like a bank. Usually in the past, we've done it with FIUs. So we need a strong partner on the ground, and we especially need the buy-in from the country. If this is there, then we can certainly discuss an engagement in the region, because as I said, the results are extremely promising. We had a review session last year after the first 5 roundtable events we had, and we asked the countries what has changed since we had this roundtable event. And one country basically said that they established a public-private partnership after the event. So yeah, you heard Frank's presentation and the importance of public-private partnerships. We had 2 countries telling us that the number of suspicious activity reports on human trafficking, modern slavery increased after the event we had. So very promising results that really prove this concept to be right, and we really want to continue doing these roundtable events. Just what are these roundtable events about? Of course, it's about the needs of the country. We adapt to those needs. In a nutshell, it's on 2 pillars. The first pillar is on the awareness raising part. We bring in, again, survivors. We bring in different speakers that talk about their experience from their perspective, and just raise this important awareness. So it all starts with this awareness raising. And then the second pillar of the events are the discussion, development, and dissemination of human trafficking, modern slavery, red flag indicators. So you just also heard Frank's presentation on the indicators report that we are currently developing. So of course, this is something that we discussed. We want the indicators to be also, of course, specific to the country or the region. And this is usually then also drafted in a guidance and typology report that we share with the participants, so that especially financial institutions, of course, have something in their hands to use in order to really implement those indicators that we propose in their AML system. So the events are especially for the financial sector, but especially for financial institutions. But of course, also FIUs, of course, we want them on board, but even law enforcement, if this is needed by the country, is possible to integrate and include. So please, if you're interested, we are happy to receive requests, and then we can take it from there, because we believe this is a really, really good product. Then I will go on to a next activity, a next field that FAST works in and concentrates on, is the role of assessors. I mean, I believe that many of the, 170 participants that we have today are assessors, evaluators, going to evaluate other countries. And there is a little bit, what do we want? What's important to us when we speak of assessors or assessment bodies as the CFATF? So first of all, we would like to increase the focus of these assessment bodies on human trafficking and modern slavery risks. An example could be the integration of the topic in the strategy of or in the working plan, for instance, of the assessment body, really to embed that topic in the assessment body's working plan or strategy. Like, for instance, I was very happy when RJ in his keynote remarks mentioned that human trafficking, modern slavery is one of the, I think, 3 key priorities of his term of the heads of FIUs forum head or chair. So very positive to see this development in the region, and we would like to further push these activities. And then, of course, raise awareness among assessors, because human trafficking and modern slavery is not comprehensively addressed in mutual evaluations. So this might sound familiar to you. It's a little bit the same pattern as we see in national risk assessments. It's the same in mutual evaluation reports we have looked at and analyzed, and we really don't see that human trafficking and modern slavery plays a huge role in there. And of course, this is related to the fact that it's not addressed comprehensively in national risk assessments, because what probably an assessor would do before the on-site visit, he will probably not only, but probably have a look at the national risk assessment and look at the main threats of the countries he's going to assess. So this is, of course, interlinked, but we believe that country assessments can also act as a strong tool if good examples, but also challenges are showcased and mentioned in these assessments, in these reports, that this can also then provoke a change in the system. So what we would like to promote is for the assessors to focus on human trafficking, modern slavery situations in the assessed country. You heard of the Global Slavery Index that I just mentioned today already. So maybe have a look at the estimated numbers of victims of human trafficking in the country you are going to assess, and then maybe have a look at how much this country actually deals with the crime. Is there a gap, or are they doing a good job? So to be aware of this problematic, and then of course also showcase good practices and promote good practices and mention good practices. For instance, I'm just aware of one mutual evaluation report, for instance, from Mexico, which is a good example that they mention financial inclusion and their tiered system they have, their risk-based approach they have in the country on financial inclusion for vulnerable groups. So this could also be, of course, a good idea to showcase good practices. So what we are doing from FAST is, of course, the engagement with FATF and FSRBs, as we are doing today, of course. The webinar is part of this activity today. And we are also providing assessor briefings before a country visit. So what we are doing basically is an analysis of the country that is going to be assessed, good practices and challenges, and just an overall situation, and then share this assessor briefing with the assessment body to be shared with the assessors before the country visit, so that they know a little bit where they can focus on, and to make their life a little bit easier. And this brings me to the last activity point I would like to mention today is an online training certificate for FIUs. RJ, he mentioned it at the beginning that he is Cayman Islands is part of this project group. So we are happy to have a representative from the Caribbean region in the group. And I think that's a very good tool that everyone, I invite everyone to complete the course once it's ready. But I will come to that. So the project team consists of 8 FIUs, amongst other the Cayman Islands FIU, ECOFEL, which is the e-learning platform, let's say simply, of the Egmont Group, so the international organization of the FIUs, and also Interpol. So we also have this law enforcement perspective. But the online training course is especially drafted for FIUs, but that's important to say, not only. So the access, everyone can access the platform of ECOFEL. Everyone can register there and complete the course. So really, I invite all of you, no matter what government position you're from or department you're coming from, to complete this course. Because at the end, you will get a certificate. So you really have something tangible in your hands that you can show that you've completed this course and that you've learned a lot about human trafficking and modern slavery and how to tackle this crime. And to also simplify a little bit your lives as a learner, we have two types of course. We have a basic course and an advanced course. So one course is a little bit shorter than the advanced course, which goes a little bit into more detail, but both courses can be completed independently from each other and also will give you a certificate at the end. But to put it very simply, basically, the basic course involves everything that the advanced course also involves. The advanced course just addresses a little bit more chapters and modules. I think for the region, in the Caribbean region, it's also interesting to hear that we are planning to translate the tool. I think that's an important issue. Language, or that it does not become an issue. We try to translate, or we will translate it into Spanish and French. And the pilot phase is thought to be in spring. So we will have a 2 weeks pilot phase where FIUs are invited to complete the course. And then after implementing the feedback, we will launch the course in July 2023, when it will be accessible on the ECOFEL website. Of course, we will make some noise around it, promote the course, but again, you can already make a reminder in your calendar now that in July it will be ready, and you can, during your summer break, you can complete this course and make this certificate, which consists of different modules, as I said, such as tools to better detect human trafficking, modern slavery, tools that you can use within your FIU, within your agency, but also share with the private sector through a PPP, for instance, a public-private partnership. We address the importance of national risk assessments, remedy is a topic, and of course also financial inclusion and some other topics. So you see a little bit the same as we have done today, different topics that are relevant to the different agencies and that are relevant to fight human trafficking and modern slavery. And with that, Dawn, I will give the floor back to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Simon, for that overview on those topics, which are all very important and very helpful, so that everyone can be aware of the work being done by FAST, not only globally, but more specifically in this region, to assist our CFATF members in terms of raising awareness of this crime that is very prevalent and does pose a risk to all our countries, either as destinations or as originators of these types of crimes. Before we move on to our final presentation, just to let you know that the slides from the presentations today will be made available to all participants. So as we come to the end of our webinar, it's my great pleasure to invite Mr. Daniel Telesclaff, the Project Director of the FAST Initiative, to provide us with closing remarks. Daniel, welcome, and I turn the floor over to you.
Thank you so much, Dawn. Pleasure to see you, albeit virtually, but I'm sure the day will come where our paths will also cross in person. I'll be very short. Let us ask ourselves the question, why are we doing that? And I think we are doing that because it's relevant. I think you heard that from Ronnie. Ronnie made it very clear how relevant it is. Of all crimes, this is probably the worst I can imagine, the exploitation of human beings. And on the other hand, we heard it's highly profitable and there's actually a relatively low risk of being detected. So if you were a criminal, wouldn't you choose to exploit labor or to traffic people? High risk, high profit, low detection are the ingredients for a very profitable criminal business. Now, I know we are all busy, especially in the AML CFT sphere. But this is not just another item on a wish list. I believe this is a must that we must engage. And I hope we have given you a few ideas about tools you can use to address the issue in a meaningful way. It's not rocket science. It's not, I think I can think of some other AML topics that are more complicated and more time consuming. And it should become more relevant because it could affect us, it could affect members of our families, it could, easily be someone you know. 50 million people is abstract to me. I can't imagine how many that is. But 1 of 150, that's the risk we are talking about. 1 of 150 people in the world are living in modern slavery. If you think about the number of people you know by name, one of them could be a victim of trafficking, forced labor, or child labor. So we were really very glad in partnership with CFATF to provide you with tools and ways how, if you like to address this, how you can do that. And we will continue to provide for tools. That's our mandate. If you want to keep track of what we're doing and how we try to help authorities, sign up to our newsletter. You'll find it, the way how to do that on our website, www.fastinitiative.org. And these tools won't repeat what has been said today. Red flag indicators, also always very relevant. So here, that's a job for the regulators to bring them to the attention of the reporting entities. Survivor inclusion, as we heard from Ronnie, and meaningful survivor inclusion. National risk assessments, private-public partnerships. This is all probably in your toolbox already. So it's not about reinventing the wheel, really. So how do we change and innovate if we want to change and innovate? Well, first, I believe it takes leadership. I think it was Leona that mentioned an example from Canada. Without the engagement of the head of the FIU in Canada, this would not have happened. Without the engagement of RJ in your region and putting that topic on the agenda and working on it, even knowing that it's going to be difficult because of the lack of data, this is true leadership. And that's what we need. That's what it takes, and it really means the world to us. It's also, I think, an excellent example of leadership, Dawn, to you personally, and all your colleagues who are helping you in the Secretariat. You never let us down. Whenever we picked up our receiver and called you, you were ready to consider it and give proper attention. And we all know how busy you are and how much priorities you have to deal with. So thank you very much for that. I'm also very grateful to all the speakers and presenters today. Simon in particular for the whole organization. This takes some efforts to get this up and running, but thanks to the excellent cooperation with CFATF, I think this was a very successful webinar. We had over 170 participants all over. Even when I speak, there's still 170 participants. So that's really a success story. So thank you to all of you for giving the topic the attention that it requires. So with that, best of luck for becoming a leader. If you choose to do so, let us know. The minimum we can do is give you visibility. And again, don't forget, this matters for your upcoming mutual evaluation. I don't think that necessarily all the countries that got good ratings have better systems. I think they have just been much better to give visibility to the right issues. And maybe, when you are responsible for preparing your next assessment, this topic is around the corner, is going to come up. Now you know what you can do. But, if, for example, a jurisdiction does not address these topics in an NRA, you may be challenged on this. And on the other hand, that's what we have seen in Mexico, for example. You can actually get points for engagement in that issue. Every assessor will give you credit for that. So there are many reasons how to do it, and the upcoming ME certainly not the last one. So with that, again, Dawn, everybody involved here, including my own team, thank you very, very much. Have a good rest of the day, a good weekend coming up soon. I'm a little bit closer. I'm in Europe now to the weekend. All the best, and I hope to see you all again in a not too distant future. Goodbye.
Thank you very much, Daniel. It's been a pleasure. And just to briefly say that on behalf of the chairman of the CFATF, the Honorable Samuel Bulgen, and the CFATF members, it's been a pleasure collaborating with FAST, and we look forward to continuing to do so. So we will always make time for you and your team, Daniel. Thank you very much for everything.